Hi, I'm James Franklin. I will argue that God is not needed to give life meaning. There is an objective right and wrong that arises from the inherent worth or dignity of persons, and acting in accordance with the objective right gives life meaning. However, the existence of God would enhance the meaning of life, at least the right sort of God would. According to one popular conception in Western countries, there are two possible views of the universe: materialist atheism and personal theism, and life is meaningless in the first and meaningful in the second. Evangelists of one religion or another offer their product as a liberation from the meaninglessness of a godless universe, and often they have success. Dichotomy, materialist atheism versus personal theism, is oversimple, as I'll explain in a moment, but it is not totally wrong. There is a problem with finding meaning in a strictly atheist materialist universe. Normally, we think of the death of a human as a tragedy, but the explosion of a lifeless galaxy is just a firework. But according to strict materialism, humans and lifeless galaxies are just the same sort of thing. So it does not in any absolute sense matter what happens to humans, and hence there cannot be any absolute sense to the meaning of life. That is commonly recognized by some of those promoting that view, who urge that an absolute meaning is not attainable and we should lower our ambitions to just succeeding in whatever projects we choose. And on the other side of the dichotomy, acting on the side of a transcendent God, along with others of like mind, does promise to give life a meaning it would not otherwise have, at least with an adequate choice of God, but we may need to think about that. However, there are two things wrong with the dichotomy meaningless atheist materialism versus meaningful personal theism. The first, of course, is that the spectrum of cosmological views is much wider than those two. We ought to examine all the serious contenders and see if any of them are both credible in themselves and able to give human life meaning. I'll make a start on that shortly. The second problem is that personal theism as a source of meaningfulness suffers from a Euthyphro problem. In Plato's dialogue Euthyphro, Socrates asks whether something is pious because the gods approve it, or whether the gods approve it because it is pious. A similar question arises for meaning in life given by obeying God. Not just any purpose beyond ourselves is sufficient to give our life meaning. For example, if we are being grown by Martians to be harvested by them, that does not give our life meaning. If our life is to be meaningful in virtue of obeying God's commands, those commands need to be good, not arbitrary. A God whose nature is good is required for the purpose of giving life meaning, or we are slaves to the whims of a devil. But then the Euthyphro problem arises. Are the actions which will make life meaningful right because God approves them, or does God approve them because they are right? If divine approval alone makes them right, then they appear to be arbitrary, and divine or satanic approval cannot make them right. If God approves them because they are inherently right, then their inherent rightness seems to be conferring meaning, and God's existence is not doing any work. Or if divine approval depends on God's inherently good nature, then again, inherent goodness is doing the work. To progress further on what can really confer meaning on life, let us look at a first crude classification of the wide spectrum of cosmological views. The spectrum can be divided into four, with materialist atheism at one end and personal theism at the other. A well-known option between them is pantheism, which has no personal God, but conceives the physical universe, or apparently physical universe, to have divine attributes. It comes in many versions, like Plotinus's Neoplatonism, Spinoza's pantheism, the absolute idealism of the late Victorians, panentheism, panpsychism, recent deep ecology, and the Confucian concept of the mandate of heaven. I would like to concentrate on a fourth option, emergentism, which lies between materialist atheism and pantheism. It is much less discussed and has virtually no explicit followers. I do not believe it either. But it deserves consideration, and it is also very relevant to the meaning of life question, because it appears to be the minimal option that permits an objective meaning of life. So considering it as a thought experiment should give us insight into the minimal conditions for life to have meaning. According to emergentism, materialist atheism used to be true up to 500 million years ago. The world consisted only of gas clouds, stars, and rocks. There were no gods, and the universe had none of the divine qualities that pantheism attributes to it. Then, in one tiny corner of the universe, through purely natural and undirected processes, a somewhat different kind of being emerged, living ones. Finally, and again through undirected natural processes, there emerged in some of those life forms rational consciousness with the complex of properties that humans are observed to have. They are human beings with powers of reason and objective moral worth, capable of understanding such concepts as divinity. They are entities of an entirely different kind from those admitted by materialist atheism, but they exist only locally. They do not confer on the universe outside themselves any properties that it did not already have, nor do they connect with or mirror any divinity elsewhere. Emergentism takes a naive view of those human properties and accepts that they are as they seem to be, before undermining or explaining away by philosophical thought, whether materialist, idealist, Nietzschean, or any other. Emergentism thus takes literally the way literary and psychology experts speak, that humans matter, that life has genuinely worthwhile and tragic aspects, and so on. Thus, a major strength of emergentism is that it is the cosmology that departs least from the picture of naive common sense. It does not add unobserved gods or divine-like properties to the physical universe, but nor does it try to reduce human consciousness, emotions, and importance to physics. So, as a thought experiment, let us suppose that emergentism is true. There is a physical universe without gods or divine properties, and there are humans as we first take them to be, physical beings, but with a consciousness, rationality, psychological unity, free will, emotional life, individuality, dignity, and inherent importance. I defended a view like that in this book. The Worth of Persons, the Foundation of Ethics. The idea of the book is that intrinsic moral worth supervenes on the complex of distinctively human properties like rationality, consciousness, and so on, and then ethics, in the sense of what to do, follows from that. In that world, does life have a meaning? And if so, what is it? It is clear that certain actions have intrinsic importance and so can contribute to a life of meaning. For example, the action of saving the human species from extinction. Given that humans matter in an absolute sense, their extinction is an absolute evil. So if a virus or AI threatens to wipe out humanity and someone prevents that happening, the Saviour has done something of absolute and great value. That is a cause for congratulation and an act of a genuinely meaningful life. On a smaller scale, any actions that enhance the features of humans that contribute to their absolute worth, consciousness, rationality, emotional life, dignity, and so on, as listed above, goes some way to making the life of the actor meaningful. Education, for example, develops the rationality that is essential to being human. So being an educator is one way to live a meaningful life, while undermining rationality by promoting postmodernism isn't. Notice that all this is true in the minimal scenario we are considering in our thought experiment, in which emergentism is true. Now, what happens if we add some divinity to our ontology and move to pantheism and/or personal theism? How does that affect the meaning of life? Essentially, not much. On those views, humans still have the properties they have in emergentism: rationality, consciousness, free will, intrinsic worth, and so on. Those properties may be differently caused, for example by divine creation rather than emergence by natural process, but the properties themselves are the same. Hence, their moral consequences are also the same. In particular, their consequences for the meaning of life are still the same. Since humans are still valuable in themselves, and for the same reasons as before, their rationality and so on, protecting them from harm, educating them, and otherwise acting for their benefit are objectively good actions, and so help to give the life of the actor meaning. In that case, does a religious cosmology add anything to the meaning of life, the meaning it would have in an emergentist perspective? That is God or pantheism any use as far as the meaning of life goes? There are three ways in which theism could enhance the meaning of life over and above what it has in the emergentist scenario. They are not essential to giving life meaning, but they could be worth having and would give life more meaning. The first comes from the doctrine of Judaism and Christianity that the features of humans that make them intrinsically important are in the image of God, in the words of Genesis. As Augustine puts it very directly, the excellence of humans consists in the fact that God made them in his own image by giving them an intellectual soul which raises them above the beasts of the field. In Christianity, that is confirmed by the doctrine of the Incarnation, according to which God thought it worthwhile to actually become human. The commonality between humans and God, implied by those doctrines, does give an enhanced sense of the worth of humans, with the consequence that action for the good of humans and God is at least more obviously valuable, and hence more obviously confers meaning on the life of those who undertake it. Historically, seeing people as made in the image of God has of course motivated many actions of charity and justice, such as movements to abolish slavery. The second way in which theism has an advantage over emergentism when it comes to the meaning of life arises from the rather depressing or tragic nature of emergentism. While it is true that under emergentism it is virtuous and meaningful to prevent the extinction of humanity, ultimately those actions will not succeed. Humanity will become extinct. According to emergentism, we are all isolated individuals for whom it will not end well. So there is a limit to how meaningful actions and lives can be. But for theism, the very same actions that are virtuous under emergentism are more communal and potentially permanently successful. That is especially so in Christianity, which sees God as part of the human community via the Incarnation, and permanent salvation possible as a result, perhaps even for everyone. The possibility of a life whose actions have permanent success renders life potentially more meaningful than in emergentism. The third way in which theism promises to render life more meaningful than emergentism is epistemological. While it should be possible by reason to establish the absolute worth of persons, and hence the meaningfulness of lives devoted to protecting and enhancing that worth, the historical record shows poor performance by philosophy in that regard. Most ancient religions and Greek ethics failed to get there, or even to focus on the question. Revelation can do better. The point of revelation, according to the main founder of Jewish philosophy, Saadia Gaon, was to be a kind of shortcut to the important truth that reason is proving sluggish at establishing, although in principle it could. Extensive study of Kantian philosophy might lead some people to accept his view of the absolute worth of persons, but in practice, few people are going to do that. Most will be better off with the revelation of Genesis, that man is made in the image of God. So, theism would help one know what the meaning of life is, and, as in all cases, having the theory correct is always a help. To conclude, your life has meaning to the extent that you act on the side of right. That makes sense, provided there is an objective side of right. The absolute worth of persons, supervening on distinctly human properties like rationality, consciousness, and freedom, gives an account of what is objectively valuable, and hence what states of affairs and actions are objectively right. The minimal cosmology needed to make sense of that is emergentism, which is not theistic. However, theism takes the insights of emergentism and adds to them a more hopeful story which embraces the possible meaning of life.